FutureSense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nyck Jeanes and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, FutureSense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is FutureSense. Good morning to you. I hope you've had a great weekend. It's been a busy time, and for many of us perhaps there's a lot of themes in our lives and the perception of politics, culture, society that are carrying on and plugging you in some way, or you're watching from a distance and shaking your head in disbelief. Certainly I'm a bit like that at times. It's quite incredible what is going on, and we seek on this show to focus through the eyes of the notion about the future, where we're moving to. How are we best serving ourselves and serving the planet and serving our society in looking consciously and with awareness at the way to stimulate and accelerate change on the planet and growth, essentially. And there are many themes here, of course. And in the world at the moment, currently in this country and around the world, there are many issues, many hot button issues going on, many things flaring up. Look at what's going on in Paris and France, for example. The whole thing with the Trump administration in America seems like there's going to be a lot of revelations coming out there soon. And of course, in this country, we've just seen our government, including the Labor Party, support the bill. What's it called?
I think people have been calling it generally the anti-encryption bill.
Oh, yes. I had a new name for it, but I didn't want to say that on air.
Slightly misnamed because it's not
misnomer.
It's not actually breaking encryption, but it's finding ways to get around it. Yeah.
So before we go into some of those topics, especially the anti-encryption bill, many themes, as I said, they're going on. How do we look at this from the big picture? How can we sort of take a step back for a moment before we go in deep into some of these issues that are currently on the planet?
I think one useful way is just to bear in mind that we are in the midst of this transition from the modern paradigm to the next paradigm, which we might call relativistic or postmodern. And with every shift like this, there are some fundamental themes in terms of how we think, how we organise ourselves, and how we structure society and organisations. And we can look at the specific themes that come with this new paradigm. For example, the decentralisation of power is a theme. The network-centric ways of living is a theme, and that implies connecting all the dots, connecting everybody that's concerned with any particular issue that we might need to address. Open and transparent communication is another theme, and with that comes honesty and integrity, of course. And what we're seeing is that the absence of these things is actually causing issues now. And you can look at pretty much any of these big stories that are in the news at the moment and see, okay, there seems to be an imbalance, in each of these situations where people aren't talking to each other enough. People aren't connecting the dots enough between all of the relevant issues. There's an absence of honesty and transparency often, and this is showing up in our domestic politics and international affairs. And the themes that come with the new paradigm offer us solutions. I mean, this is why there is a paradigm shift underway, because the tension created by the old systems not being able to cope with the additional complexity is bringing a new way of doing things, which is really resulting from a shift in human consciousness. It's always good to just come back and understand that is the actual trigger for the change, is a shift in human consciousness, a shift in how we perceive reality, how we perceive what needs to be done. Yeah.
I mean, just on that point, of course, how many people, I wonder, in the world, in this community, in Australia, in the world generally speaking, of course it's different in different countries, are aware of, conscious of, related to, believe in the notion that there is a shift in consciousness itself. For many people, that notion is not a familiar idea.
You're right, and even the idea of evolution, I think,
yes.
Generally people seem to think, and certainly the impression I got as growing up through my formal education was that evolution was something that happened a long time ago, and it's not really going on at the moment. We're kind of waiting for something new to happen, but nothing much is going on, which is very naive, really. I mean, it's an ongoing process. It's always happening, even though sometimes we can't see it. And I think science has been slow to really pick up on evolution in the present time. We hear little bits and pieces about it through science occasionally, but and certainly I think part of that, the reason that science hasn't been big on it, is that a lot of the evolution that has been going on is that we talk about on this show has been psychological evolution. Evolution in the way that we perceive reality in our underlying frameworks for making sense.
Arguably not a pure science, and thus is disregarded or at least put to the side somewhat. That's interesting, but it doesn't really apply to the scientific model.
No, we don't have very many machines with needles and dials and numbers on them that can sort of track that kind of thing. So it doesn't fit with the materialist mindset.
It's so interesting, this notion of evolution itself and consciousness evolution, because the word consciousness, of course, is a very contested, it's a favourite word of mine, but it's a word that science has had difficulty with up until recently, you could argue.
It's a very broad term too. People talk about consciousness in many, many different ways, and there are many facets to it, so it's always good to be as specific as possible when, if we're going to talk about that.
But this idea that human nature is just human nature, I think this is one of the places where we, in our discourses, we get stuck in the notion that things don't evolve. Humans are like that. That's how we are.
That's right. Yeah, and this comes from the first tier perspective, where whatever value system we're immersed in seems like the only value system to us. We don't have that visibility of the multiple layers of consciousness, which really only comes. I mean, you can teach the theory of it to somebody who's coming from a sort of first peer mindset. You can teach them the theory, and just like you can teach any kind of theory that has multiple aspects to it. But to really get it, you need to be starting to poke into the second tier and starting to get that understanding of the multidimensionality.
Which is an experiential thing, isn't it? And here, as we talk about these tiers, folks, if you don't know what we are referring to here, we're talking to the model of psychological development by Clare W Graves and
tiers
others.
Is spelled T-I-E-R-S.
That's right, yes, although there are plenty of tears that need to be cried on this planet at the moment for many, many things. It's in one sense, a very sad place, and also very beautiful. And that paradox of being is also part of the equation right now, that so many people are having wonderful experiences in a world where we have so much, so many of us have so much, and pretty well most people on the planet have more than they used to have, many who don't, but many do, and yet we're not happy, we're not satisfied, most of us. We're confused, we're dislocated somewhat, we are struggling with the networks of our being, you could argue, and the networks that we now rely on for much of our interaction out of social media and the likes, and yet it's all a contested space between who am I and who am I within the whole.
That's right, and when we're in transition, we have to navigate this place of not really knowing what our values are. So that adds to the tension of the time, is that many people are going through this transition themselves at a personal level, and their values are shifting. And in that space, there's like a bit of a no man's land in between the old values and the new values, where you kind of cut yourself adrift from the old values, but you haven't quite got hold of what your new values are yet. So it's a place of inquiry, a place of uncertainty.
And I suppose with a lot of that confusion, what happens is projection outwards onto various elements in society that don't seem to be resonating with or reflecting where one is at in themselves, what a person is needing, what a person is thinking or feeling about life, the universe and everything, their own personal lives, their situations, and seeing a lack of response of genuine response with integrity and authenticity, as you said before, from our politicians, from our business leaders. We'll look at the Banking Royal Commission, obvious example recently, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And so, the anger and repression that people are feeling is projected outwards so often because they don't know where else to place that energy, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the general themes around this transition beyond the modern paradigm is one of being tired and exhausted. The mindset, the modern scientific industrial mindset, is mainly focused on personal success, and the concept that sits behind that is that personal success is a direct result of the amount of time and effort that you put in.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're not succeeding, then we're not working long enough, we're not putting the time in, or we're not trying hard enough. And consequently, this eventually leads to burnout when we got that mindset. No, I'm not succeeding. I just need to try harder.
Yeah.
I've got to spend more time, and eventually that leads to the classic burnout, which then usually often results in a sea change or a tree change, where people just want to like cut loose from where they have been, get out of the madness, escape the rat race, and those kinds of things.
I mean, part of it to me brings up this thing I've been saying recently, is that we're kind of addicted, I think, to causation, the notion that one thing leads to the other. Like you're saying there, if you work harder, you'll make more money, you'll be more successful. If you try harder, there's a direct causal link. But of course, that's just one way of seeing it, and that really is, I guess, a first tier way of seeing how things work in our reality.
Certainly, I mean, the whole linear thing really emerges with the fourth layer, where we get that, as we've spoken about on the show before, we get the frontal lobe development kicking in, the cause and effect understanding. If I do that, then this happens. Right?
Which has led to a lot of very good science, but it's an incomplete picture.
I mean, each one of the value systems, the perspective is incomplete. It's all part of adding to the compiled picture of the world that we have with each new layer. But so the linear thinking from that agricultural fourth layer, the authoritarian way of doing things, then breaks out into multiplicity in the modern mindset, where instead of just having one right way of doing things and being totally linear and black and white, then we have multiple options, and we can explore each option and test each option, experiment to find which is the best option for us. Right? So that brings great flexibility and increased capacity to cope with complexity. But we're moving beyond that now, because one of the reasons is that we're getting flooded with information from our connectivity, our communications technology. So we're no longer able to look at all the options and assess each one. We just don't have the time. There are millions of options now, too much information. So the next step in moving to the sixth layer is to form networks, use our networks, consult our peers. So we're actually multiplying our own brain power through the network. Instead of having to overtax our brain to look at all of these options, which there are just too many of now, then we ask all of our peers and say, what do you guys think? And we come up with a group solution. And that transition that we're in right now at a global level, and many people are going through it personally, offers the solutions for many of the great challenges that we're facing in society at the moment.
Because I guess one of those, because when you talk about this flood of information that we have in our reality, the add-on here in the last couple of years, not that it's new, it's always been there, is the notion of fake news, that sort of label, the reliability of information, the truth of information, the relative truth of information too, that we actually, the only way we can really determine that is, I guess, by dialoguing with our peers and say, what do you think of this? Is this true? How do you feel about that? Where's that come from? Do you connect with that?
Even
trying to make sense of all that.
Even the definition of true is changing, right? As I often say, whose truth are we talking about here?
That's right.
So the scientific way of thinking is that we can experiment and test to find the truth. Previously, in the fourth layer, which is the authoritarian agricultural way of thinking, the truth came from God.
It was given to us.
It came from a higher authority. It might not have always been God, but we didn't have access to that knowledge. We had to consult a higher authority to get the knowledge. That was the mindset. And anybody who thought that they had the knowledge was a heretic, and sometimes they were burnt. As a result, right? Anybody who stood up and said, "Hey, look, I've been working this out, and now I've figured that the Earth
is not flat,
rotates around the sun," and well, that didn't come from God.
Burn her.
And it happened. That actually happened.
Yes.
And then when we became modern and scientific, then we actually started to believe, no, we can figure things out. We can actually do science. We can find out what's true. And then that gets tricky and shifts again with the transition to the sixth layer, where all of a sudden we start to realize that, wait, it looks true from this angle, but wait, if we go around and stand over there and look back at it the other way, it actually looks different. So the truth shifts depending on your perspective.
Yeah, because of course on the fifth layer, I guess truth is an aspect that serves your particular version of that serves the result that you're trying to achieve.
Well, that's right, and often, usually science comes up with a hypothesis first and then tests it through experimentation to find the truth. But simply the formation of the hypothesis, of course, has an influence on how you go about testing and doing the science, right? So you're shaping the outcome by forming the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And as we often know, when you go looking for something, pretty much usually you find it.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and Nyck Jeanes. We're talking a little bit this morning about the change, all the changes that occur on the planet, and that shift from, in Clare W Graves' model, from layer 5 into layer 6, into from the multiplistic to the relativistic expression of human beingness. And we're seeing the struggle of that change in showing up in so many different places in the world, in politics and culture and the like. And one of those, of course, is the anti-encryption bill that's just been passed in our federal parliament in the last couple of days at the end of the year's sitting season.
Yeah, what an interesting thing that is. It brings up so many different issues. And of course, we've got this regressive research going on as well, because we're in the transition phase between two paradigms. So it's not just the challenge of moving from the modern scientific industrial way of thinking to the relativistic, but it's also the challenge of a lot of our leaders slipping backwards into rigid linear thinking, or even worse, into just pure power-based behaviours, which we see a bit.
Yes, we certainly do. And it seems with this, this legislation, folks, and I know many of you, especially listening to this station, would be pretty up to speed with this legislation, which requires, or does a number of things, but it requires this legislation smartphone makers and software developers to provide a backdoor into encryption services for Australian police and security agencies. This is something that, other than probably in countries like China and a couple of others, Russia, you could argue, has never really been done before.
Let's not forget the USA.
Oh, well, yes. No, the USA is pure and perfect, and they don't do things like that at all. They are the guardians of democracy across the planet.
What was that guy's name? Snowden, right?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about him.
That's right. Yeah, really interesting. Where do we start? There are so many different issues that we can unpack around this. One of them is just the fact that this was a publicly tabled and discussed bill. I find very, very interesting. Historically, these sorts of decisions around intelligence gathering, have been made behind closed doors and not discussed publicly. So I think it's very interesting, just the fact that they've decided to put this on the table and discuss it in Parliament.
Well, it seems pretty obvious to me. It's all about politics. There's an election coming up next year, and the coalition in particular likes to be seen to be tough on terrorism, tough on crime and the like. And the Labor Party, who sort of surrendered and went along with this legislation at the last minute on, I think, Thursday last week, have gone along with the same thing. I suspect fearing a backlash in a significant portion of the community, looking at Labor as being soft on these sort of supposedly anti-terrorism legislations.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to just really find out why it was pushed into public discussion. From a point of view of the intelligence agencies, really the worst thing for them is to have it out in the open. Their strategy, their operating methods, they don't really want to advertise those. And by putting this out and saying, well, here's what we're going to do, folks, we're going to build backdoors into these apps, it lets the cat out of the bag from an intelligence point of view.
And, all the tech people, experts that I've heard speak on this, among many other considerations, one of the obvious considerations is if there is a backdoor in various applications, like WhatsApp, for example, is one of the ones that they're targeting, is supposedly a platform that terrorists and child pornographers and the like use, and I'm sure that's true. But that if there is a backdoor, that backdoor then can be used and accessed and manipulated by the very forces that they're trying to keep an eye on.
That's right, and that's happened in recent times. There have been a number of leaks of tools used by the NSA, for example, which have then escaped into the general hacker population and been used against the very people who designed them, most likely.
Yeah.
It's lots of inconsistencies around the whole thing. Another, I guess, in terms of the impact of this bill, which I understand, basically they've rubber stamped it, but said that they need to do some refining before it is put into practice. I mean, that in itself means that they haven't really fulfilled this Christmas wish that the government had to have it in place before Christmas.
Yeah.
And the public comment that was, at least what I saw in the media, was a comment by Duncan Lewis, who heads up ASIO, who came out and said, well, if this was available to us, we'd use it immediately.
Yeah.
But I just noticed that the tone of his comment really didn't match the tone of, for example, the Prime Minister, who was saying, this is urgent, we're all in danger, our Christmas trees are going to get blown up by terrorists unless we have this in place before Christmas. There seemed to be a mismatch there, which kind of points to the fact that this really was a political stunt by Morrison to try and, I don't know whether it was to distract people from the internal issues that he's having in his own party.
No doubt. Well, as far as I can see, whenever the issues of terrorism or crime are raised in a sort of shrill voice in any way whatsoever by any side of politics anywhere, it's to do with failing poll numbers, essentially. I think that's probably a pretty direct causative relationship there. Yeah,
I think so, and this speaks to these general themes that we started the show with, of looking at the need for transparency. I mean, transparency is here whether we like it or not, and that's come because of our communications technology. It's very, very hard to keep a secret now. Go back 20, 30 years, and this whole idea of corporate image was well accepted, and in practice, organisations were able to hire professionals to manage their public image quite successfully.
Yes, well, corporations were actually respected, whether they deserved it or not, but they were generally respected.
And no matter what was going on behind the scenes, usually the general public didn't get to see what was happening behind the scenes. But now, because of the fact that everybody has access to social media, and it's so easy to broadcast to the world, that idea of being able to manage a public image and have it separate to the reality of what's going on inside is just basically broken down completely. And so we now need to have a balance between internal dynamics and external dynamics. What we're showing to the world with our sort of chosen public face needs to actually match what's going on inside the organisation and inside ourselves.
Oh, and that's the key, isn't it, really? Because our institutions, our governments, our companies that represent us, that produce and provide for us, are all, in one sense, externalisations of our own inner battle, the inner process that we're going through.
Yeah, and consequently, this is why our politicians are looking what's the word?
Frazzled, fraught, effed up. I don't know.
Dishonest.
They're not very impressive.
Lacking integrity and substance is because we can see what's going on inside their political parties, for example. I mean, look at all the issues that the Libs are having inside their organisation, and they're ripping themselves apart, really, and. Scott Morrison's trying to stand up in public and look like everything's okay. Where this place isn't on fire; it's all fine, and we're being tough and we've got this. We've got everything in hand when in fact they haven't.
There's a new Russell Brand video out on Netflix called Rebirth. I think it's very, very clever. It's very good, and there's a point in there where he talks about politics, and he talks about when a new administration is voted in somewhere, and he's talking about Britain, but it applies everywhere, and a new prime minister or the prime minister who's re-won the election comes out and says, "We're going to look after all of you. We're going to keep our borders safe. We're going to do this and do that," all the stuff they purport to say, and Russell Brand goes into saying, we all know it's bullshit. Everybody knows that now. But we just sort of go, oh, yeah, okay. Like if we really believed it, we'd go, oh, isn't that great? He said we can all be looked after. Oh, fantastic.
Exactly.
We're going to have tax relief and, oh my God, our borders are safe. And then he said, wouldn't it be great if one leader just came out after winning the election and said, we're going to continue as we normally be. We're going to be kowtowing to big business. We're going to be taking donations here and there. We're going to be manipulating, what we do in order to satisfy our own, salaries to justify our positions and our belief systems, our religion. Wouldn't it be refreshing if at least they just came out from number 10 Downing Street or from Parliament House in Canberra and just said, we're full of shit.
Yes.
And here we go.
Yeah. I mean,
refreshing.
It would be even better if they came out and said, this is the way things have been, and we know that it's not right, and we're going to fix it.
That would be ideal. We're not going to see that anytime soon, but you never know.
We are going to see it.
We are going to see it.
This is the way things are headed.
That's right. We do like to be positive in this show, folks. We're not actually. We would like to inform you that we're here to give you hopefully some useful information and interesting discourse and dialogue about how we're going on this planet. Not to scare you, to frighten you, to make you feel like everything's screwed up, but actually say, here are the issues and things are changing for the better. You may not be able to see them right now. They may look completely confusing, paradoxical, but actually we are moving forward. We are moving into a new world, really, ultimately. That's I don't know about belief, but I think it's I like to say, have your beliefs, but don't believe in them.
That's our public image that we're projecting.
It's a public image. Thanks for your text. First text in this morning from Sandy. She said, it's an oxymoron, intelligence gathering. Thanks.
Well, I mean, on that note,
on that note,
one of the hilarious things is that so obviously many of our politicians have got no idea about the technology. They just do not understand what they're even talking about. I think the funniest thing in recent time was when the Attorney General came out and started talking about metadata, and it became very, very obvious that he didn't even know what metadata was. Yeah, he was just reading from some script, and I guarantee that most of the politicians in Parliament probably have no idea about the technology behind what they're discussing. It comes down to it really just comes down to a shouting match. Often, I don't know if you ever tune in.
Yes,
the ABC broadcast of Parliament.
Yes.
God, I can never really listen to it.
30 seconds is enough.
But it's you could go and stick your head in a kindergarten classroom and you'll hear something very, very similar, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also in Australian politicians have a wonderful habit of leaving the chamber on important sort of social and moral issues and staying in the chamber for things like we're now discussing pay rises for MPs. They're all in the chamber for that.
Yeah, what a surprise. Yeah. What a surprise.
It's a joke.
So where the dynamic of power plays competition rather than collaboration is very much old paradigm and still very much present in our political system. And we would be wise to actually take notice of the breakdown of its capacity to cope at the present time, to pay attention to that and to start to think as a society about how we shift towards these new paradigm themes. How do we move to a motivation of seeking harmony and balance rather than seeking power over within our politics, for example.
I mean, that the letting go of the notion of competition is a really big one, isn't it? Because it appears clearly in our societies now that you win a competition of one sort or the other, small or very large business or just in the playground, and you are the winner, and it comes with certain benefits and kudos and friendship, perhaps all sorts of benefits that appear to accrue from being competitive and winning. Of course, being competitive and losing, well, you don't get that stuff. So that's
no, and it's driven by our values. So whatever our core values are, wherever they sit on that spectrum of consciousness, is going to shape our behaviour. So we've designed a political system which operates very much around this competition, and usually between just two major parties, where and in the past, in a less complex society, that worked quite well. Whether you could have where you could have a couple of people debating and arguing about what's best, right? Which is the best option here, and whoever won or put forward the best argument, would usually get their way, and that's fine when you've only got a couple of choices. But when you've got so many choices that you can't count them all, it breaks down. It doesn't work. And
it's also fine, I guess, in a pre-social media world, a pre-internet world, where those discussions on a high level, on a level, may be occurring, and the result happens, and then a certain number of people within a radius, geophysical radius, know about that. It sort of leaks out, and eventually people discuss that, and perhaps things change. But now a decision is made in a competitive way. Someone wins, someone has a point of view, they decide something, out it goes, bang, into everywhere, and immediately a flood of responses, positive, negative, everything in between come in.
Yep.
So it becomes much more complex, much quicker.
Yes, yeah, and often, arguments that are put forward in the hope of winning a debate are very, very quickly cut down by somebody who knows, what's actually going on, and then they'll tweet that, and it'll go viral, and the argument is suddenly hollow. Yeah, just like this argument that they put forward that they really need to get this legislation through before Christmas because of the terrible, terrible security threat. At the same time, as the border force budget is being cut. Yeah. And I think we looked at.
I don't even know how they can. I tried to search for that before. I couldn't actually find a direct piece about the border force being cut.
I've got a piece here from.
I think they're managing what's going out a little bit about this. To me,
I'm sure
it's been picked up, but
trying to
manage it. I mean, it's ridiculous that they push through this legislation, dubious at the best. Its nature, its application, what's going to happen from this legislation itself, and meanwhile, the very people who supposedly protect our borders and do other stuff like that. The budget's been cut massively, and a whole bunch of jobs are going.
Yeah. So quite clearly there's a lack of integrity.
Please explain, as somebody famous once said.
This argument doesn't have. It's not one based on integrity. Obviously, I found an article in the Sydney Morning Herald from the 7th. What was that, Friday, I guess. Saying that Australian Border Force is quietly slashing staff numbers at airports over the busy Christmas period, and is believed to have suspended a fleet of boats supposed to protect the nation's northern waters, in cost-cutting moves that insiders say threaten national security, at the very same time that the Prime Minister is standing up in Parliament and saying, unless we get this bill through, we're not going to be safe at Christmas time. So, I'm afraid it just doesn't stack up.
And, Labor really has succumbed, as we said earlier, to this without securing amendments and setting aside reservations. I'm not sure how that actually works with the legislation that's actually got through and become law, but somehow or other they've managed to keep some reservations they can revisit and make some amendments to this legislation next year. I'm not sure how that actually works. But interestingly, on Friday, Shadow Digital Economy Minister Ed Husak called the bill's judicial oversight tissue tough. That's not very tough. No. Saying, quote, there will be people who wonder why we did what we did. Vote with the government. Yeah, duh.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, you've got to ask yourself, why did Labor roll over on that? And quite likely it was a politically motivated move, designed to, in the, I guess, the assumption that it would shore up support for them, as being seen to cooperate on an issue of security, supposed issue.
Well, they're leading 55 to 45 in the latest poll in the Australian over the coalition, the Labor Party, so obviously set at this time anyway. And as they say, a week in politics is a very long time, but at this point in time you would think that the coalition is definitely on the way out. But the question will be, does the Labor Party offer anything substantially more progressive than the Liberals? And I think they probably do, but how much is questionable.
Yeah, and it, moving, I mean, this is still, it's the same old, right?
Yep,
it's okay, let's swap this one for that one, and then that one
part of the same paradigm.
So we'll swap it back again. Yeah.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM. And we've been talking particularly about the anti-encryption bill that has just passed with the support of Labor. And we've been talking about, in a sense, the sort of dying of that old layer of consciousness, which is still very dominant on the planet. And it occurs to me, and it occurs to us, that old thinking that did solve many of the problems that came from previous iterations of our consciousness, of our evolution, if you will, on this planet, is now actually creating more problems than it solves. And I guess this is how it actually pans out when a mode of being starts to pass away, but still clings to its old ways.
It is, and this anti-encryption bill is a particularly good example. That's why we're kind of milking it on the show today, because there are so many different facets to it that it just beautifully represent the challenges of a paradigm shift and the challenges of changing our thinking and changing the ways that we solve our problems.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, one of the aspects of a paradigm shift is that the old way of thinking, which was really, really useful when it first emerged because it solved our previous problems, and allowed us, in the case of this modern scientific industrial paradigm, it allowed us to be quite successful at many, many different things, including designing amazing technology, which has connected us all together and made the world more complex, and taken us to the point where the old way of thinking that produced that stuff doesn't work anymore because we're too connected. And so, as we were just discussing in the break, how these useful ways that emerge when a new paradigm arrives, they evolve, they change, and their effectiveness shifts during the time of the paradigm. And as the paradigm itself creates more complexity, then eventually it'll get to the point where it kind of supersedes itself, or I guess makes its own process redundant.
Makes its own process redundant. I think that's a good way of putting it. And of course, if you feel, if you're in power, if you think you've got the solutions, if you've had the solutions before, and you start to realise that you're becoming redundant, well, the thing you do is to hang on tightly to the old way.
Well, the funniest thing is that what happens is that you try harder, you keep using the same processes, right? The same problem-solving processes, the same thinking, but you try harder and harder and harder to solve these problems, which are getting harder to solve, of course.
They clearly haven't read Einstein.
And what eventually starts to happen is that your own process of thinking about the problem and attempting to solve it actually creates more problems instead of fixing the problems, which is just hilarious. And this is exactly what's happened with this anti-encryption bill. I mean, the implications, the impact of this legislation is widespread. Apart from the political issues, and one of the challenges that we face at the moment is because our political parties are struggling because they're based around old thinking and old structures, old ways of doing things. They are having more and more trouble internally, trying to resolve their own issues. And as that happens, then they're focusing more of their attention on fixing their own internal issues, and no one's actually driving the bus. And there are so many strategic implications to this new legislation that they've just passed in Parliament. It's going to create a world of hurt, basically, for the government. It has implications huge implications for the IT industry in Australia.
Yes, well, that's and it's been spoken. You would have already read in the mainstream press or Radio National, for example. I've certainly heard pieces on those international IT companies like Amazon, Apple, Atlassian, which is Australian, Microsoft, and many others may well leave Australia for this, and that would be a first, that's for sure. But it's not just that, is it? It's all about other things too that could be impacted.
All sorts of things. I mean, look at what is happening with the Chinese firm Huawei at the moment. I mean, they've been accused of, I guess, being forced by the Chinese government to build in surveillance capacities,
probably already there,
backdoors in their hardware, which is causing them issues. I mean, in Australia, and this is another hilarious part of this whole anti-encryption bill, is that we just decided not to allow Huawei to compete for introducing new communications technology here in Australia, and then within a week or so we've gone out and we've basically passed legislation which puts
to do the same thing for other companies.
Exactly. We basically, we criticised the Chinese Communist Party for manipulating companies from China and making them do their spying for them, and here we are saying publicly that yes, we're going to do that.
but the Chinese are wrong. They're the baddies.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
so it's justified that we can do this sort of thing in order to,
Of course. Ours is about security, right? Yeah. And I was listening just recently on the radio to somebody who'd made a fairly extensive study, in other words, actually read the full bill which was passed through Parliament, and some of the detail in there is very, very scary. I mean, they're talking about using this backdoor capacity not just for issues of national security, but for basically small crime,
petty crimes.
Crime.
I think the Labor Party managed to get something to the effect of crimes of more than 3 years jail time. That was under the auspices of this legislation.
Yeah.
But I think originally they tried to pass it for basically anything. But I'm not sure. The details are very complex.
Yeah, it was. I just forget the exact detail too. Yeah. But it was. Basically, so the example that was given in the radio show I was listening to was that the guy down the street who's like downloading torrents, of movies and that kind of thing illegally, would be liable to be the target of this kind of surveillance.
Because that person's dangerous to national security, clearly.
Yeah, and if we look at the recent report, which I think we mentioned on the show last week, of the huge number of requests, I think it topped 350,000 requests that had been made by different government agencies to access people's data, for administrative issues, really, and it's just it's way out of control, and this legislation is just going to make it worse. But it goes beyond this. I mean, issues, for example, of foreign policy. I mean, we've got all sorts of international organisations now they're coming out now and criticising our government for what they've done.
Foreign investment, therefore, in Australia.
Which foreign investor is going to put money into an Australian IT company now? No one's going to do it. It's going to have a massive impact on the industry. And even like domestic business here will be going overseas. I mean, anybody in Australia who's going to put together a web platform or something like that would be crazy to go ahead and build it here in Australia, because the legislation says that the government can force a company to put a backdoor in something, and then it'll be illegal for anybody to mention the fact that had happened. So you just wouldn't know, and therefore it's undermining confidence in government if that needed doing. I think it's already pretty well undermined. But so it's basically a massive strategic error, and it's a big signpost that our government is really just mainly focused on playing party politics and power issues and trying to resolve their own, shore up their own internal situation as well, and not thinking about the strategy, not thinking about how does this impact Australians, how does this actually serve Australians, remembering that that's what the government is there to do, is to actually serve our society. And it raises that huge issue is, at what point, particularly around issues of public privacy and public safety, at what point does the government actually stop doing what's best for Australia and start serving its own issues? Where do you draw that line? It's a big deal, and it's, Australia would be very wise to actually sit up and take notice right now, because this is the early part of a trend that's only going to grow as we progress through this paradigm shift, because our old ways of organising ourselves, our old ways of thinking about problems, and our old ways of trying to solve challenges are actually creating more problems than they solve at this point in time, and that's going to get worse.
Yes.
And I'd hate to think that we would start to experience the kind of issues, for example, that are showing up in France at the moment with
I was just going to mention France as well. That's right.
Yeah. But it's those sorts of things are inevitable if this issue isn't jumped on early. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Just jumping to France, it's interesting that the latest series of protests over the weekend, after the first, a few days before that, I guess on Saturday in France, in Paris, saw, curiously, not that many people. I think the number I heard was about 8,000 people in the streets, and yet most of the major tourist destinations, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, were closed down for the day. The disruption was severe, and the characteristic of the protest was different in that instead of a lot of farmers coming in protesting the fuel tax and other issues, living standard issues in France, is compacting of people's ability to actually make choices purely because their life conditions being diminished or certainly haven't grown significantly for a time.
Yeah.
But as well as, instead of those sort of people coming back into Paris, apparently the second round of protests saw a whole bunch of extreme left and extreme right protesters join the same sort of battle. And that's a curious characteristic, isn't it, of this? That
it is curious, but we know from Clare Graves' work that once you create a set of life conditions that is conducive to this emerging paradigm, in other words, once you provide a greater degree of visibility of what's going on, a greater capacity for people to hear about what's going on and express their own opinions, then that additional freedom of information and freedom of action creates a set of life conditions that is ripe for some of these earlier layers of consciousness to get out and express themselves in ways that they haven't done before. So it's if we look at organisations and societies which are a bit ahead of the pack at the moment and have organised themselves around the new emerging paradigm, where there's really more freedom to do things and also more acceptance of diverse opinions. It also creates an environment where people who have more radical opinions and who might be likely to take violent action, for example, are more able to express themselves. So that's one of the, I guess, the issues around the emerging paradigm that we need to be aware of also.
Do you see that as it would seem to me that that's therefore a passing phase, but it's not a very comfortable passing phase, that notion that suddenly that freedom of life conditions for people to actually think about, understand, know, connect with, make the connections, sort through the news, the fake news, and have a response to it, a response that they may not have been able to make in their lives before. Suddenly they're doing that. That's in one sense a very good thing. But as you're saying, it also makes a very more unstable world.
That's exactly right. And I mean, we see this here, in our region, Byron Bay being a little bit ahead of the pack in terms of thinking, according to the new paradigm values, is that we tolerate diverse opinions. And sometimes we see reactions to those opinions that are surprisingly strong,
vehement.
Yes, but if once you create a society with social structures and accessibility, that is more open and more free, then you've got to expect that. You've got to expect to get those edgy things showing up, and sometimes those edgy things can even be threatening. So that's an important aspect of the new paradigm that we would do well to pay attention to.
Because there are that many disgruntled people on the planet for one reason or the other. I think that's to me what's going on.
There are, and this is also why this new paradigm is going to be short-lived, because it's going to resolve a lot of the issues that have been created by the previous modern scientific industrial paradigm. However, it's also adding to the complexity, and it's not going to be sustainable. If we look at the time frames of all of the layers of consciousness and how long they've taken to play out and then be transcended through history, we can see that the time frames get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. From the original kind of hunter-gatherer basic survival mindset, which
thousands and thousands of years,
150,000 years or something like that, 200,000 years maybe, and now the scientific industrial paradigm has been dominant for about 300 years, and it's failing. And so if we look at that pattern, then we can reasonably assume that the emerging relativistic paradigm will probably only be dominant or highly influential for a couple of decades before it needs to be superseded because of the additional complexity and the complex issues that are going to arise out of that way of being human, that way of living. And this is like the cherry on top of the cake that gives rise to the big leap in consciousness.
Hallelujah.
It's the last little sort of twist of the corkscrew that makes the cork pop.
So be patient, but don't sit around doing nothing either. There are things to do, to take note of. There are things to educate yourself about. There are things to use your unique and particular gift and ability in this lifetime to contribute to global transformation. So don't be overwhelmed when I'm telling you what to do. Don't do anything that I tell you to do, but seek to make sense of it. I'm trying to.
You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up.
We've been talking a lot about the anti-encryption bill that's just passed and some of the major issues that are there, and looking at that as and the issues around it as a good example of the issues, problems, challenges that we face as we move from one expression of evolution, so to speak, to another, slowly but surely, but faster than we think. Other issues are big, and just want to mention too, we've talked quite a lot about the use of substances on this show, both for medicinal reasons and also the response of governments to the
quote-unquote illegal drug taking at particular dance parties, and you'd be aware that a young man of 19 died on Sunday, and 3 others also, I think, in critical condition after what's called the Knockout Games of Destiny dance party at Sydney Olympic Park on Saturday night. But the question of pill testing is the big one on the table, and again, New South Wales government is not considering pill testing. Seems unconscionable to me.
It's really sad, actually, to see the New South Wales Premier responding in this way once again. And if we analyse her logic or decision-making process, it looks to me that she has a very fixed mindset around this. You know, it's not even really a modern scientific industrial way of thinking that she's displaying. It's prior to that, where she's taking quite a righteous stance and just saying that drugs are bad, this isn't right, therefore we're not going to look at any options, which is a very rigid kind of linear mindset, and also to some extent closed, you know, to options. I mean, I guess that layer 4 authoritarian rigid way of thinking is generally not looking for options anyway, because it's convinced that it knows what is right. And so it generally doesn't look for evidence. It doesn't, you know, make considered decisions. It just simply follows what it believes to be right. And it's a terrible, terrible shame to see somebody in a position of being Premier of New South Wales displaying this kind of very, very old and ineffective thinking at the expense of young lives.
I mean, she claims that pill testing is faulty because it doesn't take into account people's different physical attributes.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, that raises an very interesting question. Is she getting advice on that? I mean, is this just something that she's made up her own mind about, or is she getting advice on that? And if she is getting advice, then her advisors ought to be changed, because there's plenty of evidence from overseas experience that pill testing creates a safer play space. You know, it reduces harm. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And she's contradicting what we know to be proven experience overseas.
Yes, indeed. I mean, one of her justifications is that she doesn't want to normalise drug taking, illegal drug taking. It's interesting, is that normalise illegal drug taking? What about the normalising drug taking that is legal? That's another question.
I mean, the issue is that illegal drug taking is normal.
Well, that's what I was getting to, precisely that. I mean, at this particular festival, they charged several people, but they found with 62 people, 200 searches, they found 62 people with drugs anyway. So that's, over nearly a third of the people who they searched had drugs. Yeah. So it is normal, and we're not condoning that, of course, here on this show. But let's actually face the facts that people do and will take these drugs, and how can we make it safer for them to do so if they're going to do it anyway?
Yeah, and we know how we can make it safer. We can make it safer through pill testing, and there are people in Australia who have the expertise to do that. The money is there to do the pill testing if it's permitted, and yet rigid mindsets like the premiers, unfortunately, are preventing it from happening at the expense of young lives.
And ultimately, decriminalisation would be probably a safer option overall. I mean, it's a delicate topic. It certainly is, no question about that. And we shouldn't say it should be one way or the other. But the reality is that the business of drugs is a big business. If it is an illegal business, then there's more money, more danger, more criminal activity involved in the dispensation, the production and dispensation of drugs at these festivals, and you do not know what is in these things, and you cannot know. So it just seems to be very common sense that at least pill testing is a step in the right direction to deal with the issue.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff going on. Now, coming back to Australia, you brought my attention to the interesting irony. We were talking about terrorism before, and of course Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, the infamous Peter Dutton, has been so tough on asylum seekers since he's been in this government.
Or has he?
Or has he? Because that's the question here. It's been brought to our attention that there's actually been more protection visa applications under Peter Dutton's watch than at any other time.
It's a record. 27,931 protection visa applications were made in the latest financial year. And
this is by plane arrival, so this is supposedly, in terms of this government, a more legal way to enter the country than by boats. Certainly a safer way, that's for sure, you could argue. But nevertheless, there are people who arrive here under a tourism visa or perhaps without papers and taking their chances. But there's been more than any other time, so you've got to wonder about that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this kind of thing is predictable. Anyone who knows that game Whack-A-Mole would know that. As soon as you plug one of the holes, then it kind of pops up through another hole, and so they've come down very, very hard on boat arrivals, and why they've been so fixated on looking at the boat arrivals, they've all been coming by plane.
Yeah, a former Immigration Department Deputy Secretary Abul Rizvi predicts this latest record will be broken in this current financial year, blaming the surge on the chaos, quote, in Mr. Dutton's Home Affairs Department. Most of the new wave, I must read it's misspelled there, I'm reading wrong, but it's actually spelled wrong. Most of the new wave of protection visa applicants are arriving on visitor visas, yeah, that's right, and then lodging appeals as asylum seekers. So they're not being put off trying to get to Australia. No. And Australia having, after all, been built on immigration from the very first day that we founded white settlement here. Let's face it, we are all immigrants, full stop. People are going to keep on coming here, that's that. Yeah. Well, and how does this apply for in terms of what we've been talking about in terms of changing and the evolution of consciousness here? This movement of people, the reactionary stance that many governments are taking towards refugees in the world, and the other in quotes. How does this factor in, and what's the change that's going to happen here as we go forward? Do you predict? What do you see happening?
I think the population mobility at the moment is obviously tied to life conditions. I mean, people don't leave their homes unless they have a good reason to do so. Yep. We've seen a massive wave of population migration as a result of the conflicts in the Middle East. And I guess that's another example of old paradigm strategies attempting to solve one problem but creating more problems than they actually solve, for example. The conflicts in the Middle East have been driven by probably a number of different agendas, but certainly power within the region and control of oil resources, I think, have been primary ones. And also feeding the beast, the military-industrial complex, which has to have conflict to continue its business model. And so it's always good to have a nice little war going somewhere to keep that money rolling in. And even better if you can be selling your bombs to both sides of the conflict, which is a fairly recent development over the last few decades. But bottom line is life conditions. I mean, if people's life conditions are such that they can't tolerate staying where they normally live, and most people want to stay living where where they've grown up.
That's right.
So it's simply a matter of life conditions. In terms of immediate fixes, we should look to the emerging paradigm themes that we've been talking about before, of connectivity and balance and social rights, social justice, those sorts of things, making sure people have what they need, the essentials that they need to live comfortably, to stem the migration. But of course that also means bringing peace, which is another emerging theme in the sixth layer. The paradigm that we're seeing showing up at the moment is it's very much about peace and harmony and seeking peace and harmony, and that will, in the short term, resolve a lot of these issues. I mean, one of the ways that they've used in the European Union to try and deal with the population influx is to spread the load around, and have different countries taking, which is that's an emerging paradigm strategy, to spread it around, create a network and then use the resources within the network to address the issue rather than just trying to do it from one standpoint.
Yeah, very good. Just a little bit more from this particular article, which comes from thenewdaily.com.au. The former Immigration Deputy Secretary is also quoted as saying that the big increase in protection visa applications over the past 2 years under Peter Dutton has mainly come from citizens of China, Malaysia and India. The department eventually finds most of the applications to be unmeritorious, but the processing and appeals process has become so slow that the individuals can be exploited here for 3 years on low wages or as sex workers before a final determination is reached. This surge requires a significant degree of organisation, the former secretary said. The smugglers must be aware of the paralysis in the Home Affairs Department due to a massive application backlog and must be savvily navigating this extremely complex application process, he wrote. And of course, meanwhile, as we already mentioned today, Home Affairs is reducing frontline staff like the border staff and IT contractors.
Yep. And that, again, that's a perfect example of how old thinking and old systems are actually creating more problems than they solve. So the paperwork backlog.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, while the paperwork's not being done, all of these other problems are being created. And so, it's more tension, more fuel for the change process.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and Nyck Jeanes.
Last few minutes of the show, we thought we'd just take a jump to a completely different angle of what's going on in the future, and we like to talk a little bit about astrology and deeper astrology. A lot of you out there are probably very akin to this, and many people probably not, and that's perfectly okay. But we're just going to talk a little bit about the new moon on Friday. What are you going to say then, Steve?
I was just going to say
I want to hear that.
No, what you said just prompted me to think of myself years ago when I didn't know much about astrology, and I just kind of read the columns in the newspaper, and often they weren't right. Like I'd read my stars for the day, and they didn't turn out the way that it said they would in the newspaper.
1/12 of the world's population is like this today.
Exactly. It's just rubbish. And it was only when I really got access to understanding the deeper issues and the deeper processes around proper astrology that I started to pay attention to it. So I think your comment there is quite valid. And for anybody out there listening who does think astrology is rubbish, then you're probably like I was years ago and just reading the newspaper columns and
Yeah, I like to call it a trans-rational science because it's not a science in a traditional word. It's not a causative science because the moon is here or that's there doesn't cause things to happen. To me, it's like a reflection of things and a very useful one. And it's quite profound if you can understand the sort of deeper geometry and the transits and the movement of the planets in relationship to your own chart and to the chart of of each other. In fact, it's pretty interesting. Thanks for your comments to another informative, enlightening, inspiring start to the week with FutureSense, mind expanding. Thank you very much. You get the special gold award today.
Absolutely,
appreciate that. But let's look at because it was a new moon on Friday, and of course we're still under the effect of that to some degree now. New moon at 15 degrees Sagittarius, and this particular new moon is also strongly influenced by the alignment of Mars and Neptune at 13 degrees Pisces, which makes in astrology a square aspect. Now, a square aspect is a challenging aspect where those forces or energies sort of contesting each other to some degree. So that testing square aspect between the new moon and Mars-Neptune brings out the worst of this alignment. And I think that's a rather interesting thing. And the author here says it has a rather sinister influence here. Major themes being anger, fear, deception, confusion, immorality, and perversion.
And of course, we've seen all of those in politics over the last few days.
Yes, on the grand world stage, on the national stage, and even right here in Byron Bay, you could argue too, these sort of themes are there. And have a good look for them in your own life. I guess that's the key too.
It says here that at 16 degrees Sagittarius, a fixed star in the Hercules constellation. Where is the name of that fixed star? Nyck, it's there somewhere,
yes,
isn't it?
You mentioned it to me before.
I did. It's
whoever sees it first wins, buys the next coffee.
Quickly. It's we're looking at here. It is. It's called Ras Al Gheti. Is the fixed star which is relevant in this?
Sounds a bit foreign to me, mate.
I know.
Well, I don't know that. I'm not so sure about that.
Get
mate.
rid of that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the story.
Yes. He
says that this fixed star will cause irritation from women and a ruthless drive to gain power. So that is a theme that's probably been playing out in various ways over the last few days for some people.
Indeed.
And the keys to avoiding loss and disappointment from this particular configuration of the new moon are honesty and integrity. There you go.
And it does say the effect of December the 7th new moon will last 4 weeks up to the solar eclipse on the 5th of January. There's a solar eclipse coming up. The best time for making a fresh start and for beginning new projects is during the first 2 weeks of this new moon cycle. That's now. So it goes through to the full moon on the 22nd of this month. And Mars conjunct Neptune is a very strong thing. For those who know a bit about astrology, and there's certain better people than myself and Steve out there, but we have a fairly good sketchy knowledge of deeper astrology. Mars conjunct Neptune in Pisces is a very difficult conjunction, and it adds, according to this writer, a sinister underhand influence to the aggression, sexuality and nastiness of Mars in hard aspect. Yes, and as you were talking about, the star in the Hercules constellation joins that star, which acts like Mars on steroids. Mars being sort of essentially the god of war and reflective of our physical abilities, of our drive, of our ambition, of our sportiness, of the way we use our bodies, and much more than that too.
Here's some good advice here. It says the actions of others are likely to make you angry, mean and vengeful under this particular constellation. And the best option, the author says, would be to ignore any provocation. If you must react, then do so in a straightforward, direct and honest way. Don't leave anything to the imagination. Good advice.
Very interesting. And of course, Neptune in this equation too. Neptune is representative, you could say, of the dreams, of aspirations, of delusion also, of illusion, of deeper understandings, of sort of Piscean understandings of great sort of spiritual notions too. So both of those things, secrets and so forth. So there's a deceptive influence to this as well. It has the potential, this full moon, to make you feel insecure, guilty and apologetic. Interesting. Seeing only the best in people increases the chance of becoming disillusioned or worse. That's interesting. And to counter the deceptive influence of this new moon, you must be above board in all your dealings. This is not the best time for high-stress competitive things like business dealings or negotiations. Predators will easily hone in on your soft side, and you could be at greater risk of being taken advantage of.
Interesting. There is an upside, though. He says that this new moon will stimulate creativity and imagination, so it's a good moon for art, music, sculpture, dance and drama, for example.
So if you're feeling, reactive to something in your life, if you're feeling like you want to get some justice somewhere and
transform it into interpretive dance.
Transform it into interpretive dance. I think there's a wonderful interpretive dance workshop coming up on this next Sunday, as a matter of fact. Well, maybe not to promote anything directly, but something there. But just around your own house, put on some great music and let yourself go in that sort of physical way. Let work it all out, and perhaps just withdraw just slightly from that desire or that impulse to react and respond in kind to someone who may have been unkind to you, so to speak. Wonderful stuff. I think that's about it for the show.
I think it is.
Thanks for joining us here on FutureSense.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. It's been glorious. And stay tuned for pregnancy, birth and beyond, and everything beyond that here on Bay FM. And by the way, folks, get your tickets to the dance party, 80s versus 90s, next Saturday night, the 15th, at the brewery. Tickets online, bayfm.org, or you can come in here to the station and get them. Bus tickets if you're living on the outlying regions. It's going to be a fantastic party. And just to come and show your support for your local community radio that's been here for over a quarter of a century, responding to the nature and the nurture, the challenges, the politics, the culture, the life, the universe, everything of this region and beyond.
You've been listening to FutureSense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. FutureSense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.